You know, looking back on my time with Diablo 4, I would say that overall, I had a pretty good experience. But it absolutely did run its course way sooner than I had hoped. And I think that's where much of the disappointment around this game, when you see people discussing it online, really ultimately stems from. You know, things start out well enough. It's got a strong base of a game after all, great satisfying gameplay, the open world and all of its activities was a real nice addition to the Diablo franchise. I personally really liked the shared world element of it as well. And the early to mid-game progression of leveling your character, getting more powerful and gearing up, unlocking skills, all of that felt pretty good. I was really enjoying myself actually up until around levels 60 to 70, at which point things started falling apart. Later levels felt like a massive grind, which in and of itself is not a problem for an ARPG, but it was an unrewarding grind with very little changing from level 70 to 100, and that was a major issue. The content pretty much stayed exactly the same. Run nightmare dungeons, hell tides, and kill the world boss when it's up. Yeah, you keep pushing the nightmare dungeon difficulty higher, but all that really meant was things got tankier and deadlier. It didn't actually add any variety to the things that you were doing, variety to the content. Just as bad, if not worse though, was that all the while your gear stayed the same. Like, I definitely wasn't running my best in slot, but everything I had was good enough that I could go a full week and not replace a single piece. So the motivation to grind simply wasn't there. Outside of Uber Lilith, there really was no content that you were grinding towards. You weren't grinding towards some new thing to unlock and experience something different than what you'd already been doing for 50 or 100 hours. The gear upgrades were so infrequent, and it didn't feel like you were getting stronger either as you kept leveling up. Like, yes, there were the Paragon glyphs to power up, but I don't know, meh, like it just wasn't interesting enough to keep me going personally. Those were my two biggest pain points, but there were definitely plenty of other issues as well. Itemization, there not being a lot of exciting rare loot to farm, and the rare stuff that was there, those uber uniques, yeah, they were cool, but they were once in a lifetime rare. I don't know a single person who got one. That's how rare they are. So they might as well not be in the game, right? Like I said, the lack of endgame pinnacle content outside of Uber Lilith, and then depending on your class and spec, that fight was either way too easy or impossibly hard. That plus no distinct rewards for the fight either. There was just no motivation for me to spend all of the time grinding towards Uber Lilith. I didn't care enough. It didn't seem like interesting enough of a carrot on a stick for me to invest all of that time. And of course, there was the laundry list of quality of life issues, gems, storage, mounts, inventory management, the legendary aspects, lack of basic features like a keyword search or a mark to keep, things that were seen in plenty of other games but just didn't make it at release for Diablo 4. The ultimate sentiment around Diablo 4 definitely seems to have been that while the core foundation was strong, like Blizzard built a game that feels good to play, the game itself lacked the content to keep people coming back week after week. It seems like it may have just released way too early and with not enough endgame to sustain a long-term play and needing more fine-tuning. Even with that being the case, between the beta test and at official release, I mean, I got somewhere like it was like 300 hours out of Diablo 4. That's pretty darn good for most games, which is why I said at the top, like, yes, overall, I had a pretty good time. Like, I would say that month and a half or so of playing Diablo 4, like, nonstop, I enjoyed my time with it. The issue is that even 300 hours falls quite short for what we expected from the next major Blizzard game, from the Diablo series, from ARPGs, and from live service titles. This is the type of game that at least the hardcore player base expects to last for thousands, not hundreds of hours. Fair or not, that is just how it is. The people who want to play the same game day in and day out, they ran out of stuff and it got way too monotonous way too quickly. Me personally, I played from launch right up until about a week prior to season 1. I had one character around 80. I had a second one that hit 100. I had gear good enough on both of them to clear all of the content. And I did and saw everything I cared to do and see. At that time, when they revealed the season 1 updates and what were planned for changes, I thought to myself, nah, like, I'm good. Sure, some things were changing. They had some new content they were adding to the game, and there were some quality of life improvements, but not enough was there that I wanted to repeat the last month and a half of grinding over again, at least not so quickly. Like, I had my fill. I was satisfied. I was ready to move on. Season 1 is now nearing its end, and with it comes the start of a new one. This past week, Blizzard laid out their plans for Diablo 4's second season in a whopping 2-hour live stream, going over its theme, vampires, discussing the new content, the features, and what was most interesting to me is laying out some pretty significant changes across the board to the base game. We are talking major updates to the endgame loop, new bosses, new gear and sources of power, easier access to Uber uniques, quality of life improvements for mounts, renown, inventory, XP gain, pages upon pages, 41 pages actually of updates for this patch detailing every single thing that is being adjusted for season number 2, most of which look and sound pretty darn good. In fact, I would say that this is looking clearly like a much more impressive and expansive update than what we saw in season 1. A lot of that might boil down to the fact that season 1 was pretty much done by the time the game launched, and they were already working on seasons 2 and 3, but it seems like with all of the feedback that they got from the launch of the game, they clearly jammed a lot into the second season, and season 1 ended up being just kind of a holdover. They were done it, they were like, well, let's just put it out. Sure, we'll make a few adjustments here and there that are maybe more urgent, but season 2 seems to be where they are implementing a bulk of the feedback. They're implementing changes for a bulk of the feedback that people had for the game at release. To the point where, like, looking at this, I am absolutely planning on jumping back in. I feel like enough time has passed from the launch grind to now, and also enough improvements are being made that I am ready to give it another go. Diablo IV, not dead? I mean, we'll see. Now, if you happen to not go over all the new stuff, if you didn't watch a live stream, if you haven't watched any recap videos, I wanted to quickly run through this new content changes and talk about the stuff that is most appealing to me and what I like the most. So let's start off with the new content, like what actually new stuff is being added in season number 2. This season is called Season of Blood. It's all themed around vampires. There will, of course, be like a new quest line for us to move through that will also introduce us to the various new power progressions, new enemy types, new systems, all of that. 22 new vampiric powers. These are class agnostic, they say, which means it can be used by anyone. There's also some gear associated with it. Basically, you will find gear that fulfills one of 3 categories, and those requirements are needed for you to use certain powers. The powers themselves, the 22 powers you unlock with the new season currency called Potent Blood. You get that just by doing stuff. And some of these powers seem pretty darn good, actually. Like, there was one that gives you a 20% cooldown reduction for ultimate skills. Pretty huge for any class that wants to maintain constant ultimate uptime. I know my druid would have absolutely loved that. That sounds pretty great. There's ones that make minion attacks restore primary resource and increase their damage against CC targets. That sounds pretty cool. There was one that lets you heal every time you cast a spell. Any spell, it was like a 3% heal or something. Or there was one that made your evade actually turn you into a cloud of bats. Bats, who cares? But it would grant unstoppable. That sounds good to me. A new event, it's the Blood Harvest event. This is basically an open world event that's sort of similar to Hell Tides. It won't be replacing Hell Tides. It's like in addition to, so Hell Tides will still happen, but then Blood Harvest will also happen. These will be available right away starting at level 1, and the Blood Harvest will rotate between several open world zones. You go in, you do various things there, you fight back vampires, you earn a currency, and then all of this can be exchanged for materials, items, and consumables. Also with this, we're getting these new basic and elite monster types as well as different variants, all themed around this vampire theme. And then, of course, all of the season pass related stuff that you expect. You level it up, you unlock cosmetics, as well as get those seasonal buffs, so on and so on. So that's the new content strictly focused on like the vampire theme of the Season of Blood, but there's more new content. In addition to this, we are also getting new endgame bosses, 5 new bosses to be exact, and these are meant to be sort of additional pinnacle fights that you work towards in your progression from levels 1 to 100 as you move through the world tiers and just as you get stronger and stronger, which should hopefully at least somewhat address one of my criticisms of there being a reason to grind. Like, once you get to level 70 and you're pushing to level 100, it was pretty much the case that it was only you did nightmare dungeons to level up your glyphs, but the only thing you were working towards in terms of something new to experience would have been that Uber Lilith fight. Well, now there's going to be 5 more fights in the mix as you're working your way up towards Uber Lilith. And these sound pretty cool. So you unlock each of the boss fights by gathering a new resource that will be dropping from the game's various activities. Doing Whispers, Hell Tides, Nightmare Dungeons, and World Events all drop a new resource that is attributed to a select boss. Access to each individual boss will be gated behind farming that specific activity. activity. So the first boss, Echoes of Vershawn, you need to farm whispers. Then there is Grigor something. You farm Helltides to get the resource to have that fight. The Ice Beast requires you to farm Nightmare Dungeons. Lord Zur requires you to farm world bosses as well as Legion events. And then Duriel, which is like the pinnacle of these new 5 bosses. In order to have a fight with him, you need to farm a resource that actually drops off the first 2 bosses, the Echoes of Vershawn and I'm just gonna call him Grigor. I don't remember how they pronounce it. Now, these aren't just like new boss fights to do because you want to try the new mechanics. There is that as well, but also each one of these bosses will be dropping specific uniques that are exclusive to that boss. So if there is a unique from the pool of each one of these bosses that you need, you know exactly how to get it. First, you do the open world activity, you farm the resource. Then once you have enough of those, you can summon the boss or however it works. You fight the boss, gives you a chance at those specific uniques within their pool. On top of that, Duriel has significantly increased chances of dropping the Uber uniques. So we're talking Shaco, Grandfather, Melted Heart, etc. The game's Uber uniques, those what were once in a lifetime, are now going to be happening much more frequently, to the point where they said that someone on your friends list is going to have one of these items. Now, they are making a lot of assumptions about the number of people on my friends list, but apparently we're going to be seeing these a lot more frequently because people can farm Duriel to get to the Uber uniques. Now, beyond target farming for uniques, each boss is also going to have its very own set of cosmetics for you to be able to farm and unlock, like new mounts, gear skins, etc. So that is pretty much all of the new content. And you might say, Force, you ran through the new stuff pretty quick, but it's not so much the brand new content coming in Season 2 that has me excited as it is the overhaul to the existing content. Because as I said in the intro, they have given a giga list of changes, updates, and fixes to the existing portions of the game. And as far as I'm concerned, this is the real good stuff. Basically, just about all of the complaints that I had around this game at launch have been improved. Let's run through them. Starting with Endgame Activities, they're going to increase the frequency of some of these. Legion events will be happening now every 25 minutes instead of every 30 minutes. Traditionally, these were a really good source of experience for leveling up, so them happening 5 minutes faster means they're happening all the more frequently, means more experience. World Boss also spawning more frequently, down from 6 hours to every 3.5 hours. Golden experience rewards have been dramatically increased from Helltide chests, cashing in Grim Favors, as well as completing individual whispers. They seem to actually imply that whisper farming will be like the best source of gold per hour in this game. And this is something that should always be the case. They should give different incentives to do different activities so that we want to do different activities. You know, if we're just farming experience and power, it's pretty much been the case. At least I don't know how Season 1 panned out, but when I was playing at launch, you just did Nightmare Dungeons. Like, that was really all you had to focus on. Yes, you spent a little bit of time with the world bosses and the Helltides. You needed that for re-rolling. Nightmare Dungeons is where you spent a bulk of your time. If they can spread us out amongst the content, they've got this big open world, they've got all these different things to do, give us a real motivation to be there. That is the ideal, and it looks like that is what they're attempting to do with these changes. Pretty big changes here in the next section to experience and monster leveling. The time required to reach level 100 is now 40% faster. So if in the past it took you 100 hours to get to level 100, now it is going to take 60. That scales. Basically, this isn't a flat reduction in the total amount of XP required, but more so is accounting for a vast number of changes they've made to experience acquisition. So for one, monster density has been increased in a lot of content. You'll be killing more monsters, means more experience. Also, monster levels will be scaling directly with the players in World Tier 3 and 4, as opposed to having a cap like they did in the past. Increased experience from killing those monsters as well will be granted. There's now a new bonus experience from incense when you have those active. You'll be getting more experience from elixirs as well as the season blessings, and it's now multiplicative instead of being additive with the world tier bonus. All of this just means more XP. The ultimate takeaway is you will be leveling to 140% faster. Some people aren't too happy that it appears they're pushing in the direction of Diablo 3. They're not quite there yet though, because as far as I recall, you could reach like max level in Diablo 3 every season. Isn't it like in a couple hours or even 1 hour, depending on your farming method? Doesn't seem like they're quite there yet, even with a 40% increased rate. It's still going to take most normal players at least a few days to a week or something, right? Some Nightmare Dungeon changes. Nightmare Sigils will now teleport you directly into the Nightmare Dungeon. Originally, we had to actually physically walk or ride our horse to the dungeon entrance and then walk in. Then they made the change so that when you used a sigil, it would teleport you to the entrance of a dungeon, but then it would be loading screen, walk in the dungeon, loading screen. They have changed that. Now when you use a sigil, it's going to be one loading screen, as it will teleport you right at the very entrance, right inside of it instead of outside of it. Another big big change to the dungeons is that they have removed a lot of the objectives, they've said, from most dungeons. Now, all you really need to do to clear a nightmare dungeon is defeat the final boss instead of doing a ton of extra side stuff. They've made a bunch of changes to the afflictions as well in nightmare dungeons. So for example, backstabbers will no longer one-shot you. Instead, they apply vulnerability on you. Death Pulse, they've also removed one-shots by reducing the amount of explosion stacking that happens. Lightning Storm, they made it so that this one only occurs in combat, and it'll grant move speed when you are inside of the protection dome and struck by lightning. This is just to offset the amount of time you spend standing still. So basically, looks like they're just trying to get rid of a lot of the one-shot afflictions that were present in the nightmare dungeons. They made additional changes to dungeon layouts, redesigning them yet again with the goal of reducing backtracking. Dungeon objectives will now be in your main path, so you're not going to miss them. They've improved the readability of traps by enhancing visual effects and reducing their effectiveness, so basically just you're going to spend less time in CC. Personally, it wasn't a problem for me because all of the builds that I played had almost like unlimited unstoppable, but you don't always have to want to run unlimited unstoppable, so them reducing the like perma CC that was seen at times, that's a good thing. And Paragon Glyph experience has been increased as well, apparently, so you'll be leveling these faster. Some changes to events. They've increased monster density for all dungeon events. More monsters, of course, means more experience. That loops into the faster leveling that we mentioned earlier. And they said that NPCs will no longer be one hit in World Tiers 3 and 4, so when you're doing like a protection or escort quest, they're not going to be instantly gibbed. All right, more good stuff here when it comes to item adjustment. Gems are now a crafting material. No longer going to be taking up massive amounts of space in your stash as well as your inventory. Basically, gems just drop as a material. You go to the jeweler and use the materials that you have to craft the gems that you want. No more taking up any space at all. If you have a gem that you don't want anymore, you break it down, it turns back into materials. Great, doesn't take up any space. Fantastic. They fixed the scroll of escape specifically for hardcore characters. They've made it so that re-rolling stats on legendary items has been drastically reduced, basically removing the bricking of items, right? Because eventually you wouldn't get the stat that you want, you re-roll, and like the price is increasing exponentially to the point that you just can't afford it, right? You drain all of your gold. That will be changing. They've made it so that it will be slightly more expensive up front, but it's not going to scale nearly as high, and the end result is going to be you can actually afford to continuously re-roll. I'm assuming this is still going to be up to the point. I also wonder, I don't know if they discussed whether or not they're going to have a cap, like eventually, I don't know if it reaches like 20 million gold, it's not going to get any higher, not sure, but they've changed how item drops work in World Tiers 3 and 4. This is pretty big for me. So in these tiers now, all non-sacred and non-ancestral items respectively will drop as crafting resources instead of items. So the items you never wanted to pick up, now you don't have to pick them up because they're just dropping as resources instead of items that you accidentally click and fill your inventory, or that you say you want to pick up for gold or resources. Now you don't have to, it'll just happen automatically. This means, of course, your inventory won't fill up as quickly, you'll have to make fewer trips back to town, and if you did plan to sell items and not break them down for resources, well, they've increased gold drop rates for World Tiers 3 and 4 to compensate for the fact that a lot of those items are just automatically going to be sharded. And one of the bigger changes as well is the fact that higher level monsters in World Tiers 3 and 4 will now drop items of higher, greater potential power. So as enemy level rises, the level of the items they drop will scale up with them as well, both the minimum and the maximum up to a point. And then once you get over 100, it continues to scale up, and I think it's just the max will stay at a point and the minimum keeps dropping as the level of monster keeps rising and rising. At launch, as we've discussed many times, once you reach like around level 75, enemies began dropping the highest possible range of item power, which meant that you could go all the way to level 100 and not get any gear stronger in certain slots of things that you found at level 80, and that was the case for me. Absolutely, I had pieces of gear that I found at 80, 85, 90 that I wasn't replacing while I was still grinding at level 100, and it reduces some of that motivation. So this is going to give that motivation to keep going to 100 because you will keep getting stronger as you get better gear, or at least the items dropping can be potentially better depending on how they roll within their respective ranges, of course. Some miscellaneous changes: they reduced the time spent farming required for renown each season, and they also made it so that all earned renown rewards will persist between seasons and characters, minus the experience or gold that you get from each level in each of the zones. So all of these skill skill points, potion capacity, max obols, and paragon points will be carrying over from season to season. They've added mark to keep. I was absolutely heralding this like very early on. It didn't make any sense to have mark as junk when a majority of the stuff you picked up ended up being junk and you only wanted to keep 1 or 2 pieces. Well, now they've changed it. They've made it so that you can now favorite an item and then will automatically salvage or sell everything else if you choose to. That is way better than the mark to junk system. I'm glad they made this change. You can actually still mark to junk. They still have that functionality, but mark to keep or mark to favorite is, I'm assuming, what most people are going to use because yes, most of the stuff you pick up does in fact turn out to be junk. They've added 2 additional character slots for those of you who are crazy enough to have maxed out characters in D4 already. And they've also made some buffs to minions and companions to no longer attack invulnerable enemies. Dude, that alone might get me to play Necro. Seriously, that's pretty good. Mounts, they are just flat out better across the board. They've improved responsiveness. They're less likely to get stuck or slow down. They are now faster as well with a base speed increase of 15%. Spur duration has been increased and mounts can now break through barricades. I actually still think they should make the barricades some sort of a mini game. Maybe either you only break through if you are sprinting or make some like quick time events where you have to like hit space at a right time to jump over. I think that'd be more engaging. I don't know how this works though. Maybe that you do have to be sprinting to break through, in which case that's a good way to do it. Just make some sort of interaction rather than just like walking through. Speaking of walking, they made the mouse cursor increasing the speed less severe. You know, it was the case that you had to drag your mouse all the way to the edge of your monitor to reach max speed on your mount. I hate that system. In fact, I still feel like they should just get rid of this period. Add like a slow walk key if I want to RP. Otherwise, just make my mount go at max speed. The reason I'm on the mount is because I want to move faster. I don't need my mount to move slow. I'll just not be on my mount. Or give me the key bind to do it if I want to, you know what I mean? But I don't know, that's my opinion. Other mount improvements include all of their cooldowns have been reduced by 50%, so you'll be able to gallop more often. And the dismount cooldown has been reduced. If you manually dismount, it is down from 10 seconds cooldown to 5 seconds. If you are forced dismount by getting attacked, it is down from 10 seconds to 4 seconds. They've adjusted how the towns are laid out, so towns are now more streamlined with improved NPC stash and waypoint placement. They've also added additional stashes to all of the capital cities. They've added stashes to the small towns with waypoints, and they added an occultist to the Tree of Whispers. That's exactly where I want an occultist, so thank you for that. In addition, they've added 10 new waypoints to the game on top of what was already there, so 2 brand new waypoints in every region. A couple of UI and user experience fixes. They've added a stash search and stash filter. Thank you. Right? Was that so hard? Maybe it was. I don't know, but thank you for finally adding it because the game absolutely needed it, especially with like aspects, having to mouse over each individual one to find the one that I was looking for. That was an absolute nightmare. They added a streamer mode. LOL, congrats to all 300 of you. I mean, whatever, it's fine, but that doesn't affect like most people, right? That's all I'm saying. Item affix tooltips will now display in a more consistent order, so there's gonna be some sort of hierarchy to this. This is a great change. Rather than like, you know, when you had 3 or 4 affixes to look at and strength was in a different position every time, it made it just more annoying to compare items to each other. Now there's gonna be some sort of a hierarchy. That is a great idea. Extracted aspects with the same legendary powers will now group together. Another hallelujah. Like, thank you. It was unbelievable. In the past, they just like grouped up per category, but not per actual power. So, you know, you'd have a bunch of a certain aspect and you'd have to keep mousing over they would all be spaced out when you auto sorted. Like, it was ultra annoying. I hated it. So now they're going to group together. That is great. They've also discussed, and this is what I'm really looking forward to, but it's not coming here in season 2. They've discussed at some point down the road, rolling aspects into the occultist, making a change sort of similar to what they're doing with gems, where it's not going to take up inventory space anymore. Maybe just like once you pull an aspect out, it gets added to like a catalog at the occultist and then you can imprint from there. That's what I ultimately hope they do. An auto run has been added to the game. You can now further zoom out the mini map. You can now hide certain combat text, like if you're tired of seeing dodge or fortified or vulnerability, you're able to get rid of that. They made improvements to unique item visibility. You're less likely to miss them, and they've approved a few accessibility options like screen radar and cursor color contrast. Okay, so like I said, a lot of changes, and those are just the highlights. They've said that once they actually release the patch notes for all of this stuff, there's going to be 41 total pages of patch notes. It's just a ridiculous amount of things changes. That is pretty much everything, though, that was discussed during last week's developer stream, as well as the blog post recapping and adding further detail. On top of that, though, there's another 2-hour live stream. It is planned for this week on October 10th. This should be pretty huge. Now, some of the things that they've mentioned going over already include big changes for class balance. Every class, I think, is getting a rework from what I understand. There will be new unique items added to the game. Existing unique items are being reworked. They're fixing damage resistances, fixing them to actually function. They're going to be making changes to how damage modifiers work, crit and vulnerability. I don't know if they're changing how the buckets work, how the calculations work, but they're maybe changing it so that not everyone's stacking the same thing as what I assume they're aiming for. And apparently there's going to be even more quality of life improvements coming to the game that they have yet to reveal. I gotta say, as much as I liked that first stream, I know that a lot is hinging on the second stream, especially for the more hardcore player base, the people who are looking for changes and improvements to itemization, patiently awaiting the October 10th stream, because that is hopefully going to reveal more things that they are more looking forward to. Also, the game got a Steam page recently. It's the Steam version of Diablo 4 is going to be launching with the start of Season 2. We'll see how that goes, because I know the sentiment from the community right now is a little mixed. People do seem excited for Season 2, just like I am, really. It sounds like they're making some great things I'm looking forward to, some great changes. I don't know if this is going to be another situation where, like, Blizzard releases a game on Steam and it just gets review bombed. I think it's entirely possible. We will see in just a couple of weeks from now. But yeah, hey, the game's coming to Steam if that's something that you were looking forward to. So to wrap this all up, I would say all in all, these are some really good changes, good enough that I am interested in jumping back into the game, whereas Season 1 simply did not entice me. Is this all Diablo 4 needs? I don't think so. Absolutely not, actually. The game definitely needs more improvements and additions. I would say that, as with a lot of live service games, we're looking at a long horizon here. You know, Diablo 4, good 1, 2, 3 years down the road is the sort of situation we might be looking at. But I do think this is a really good step in the right direction. I wouldn't call this a total revival, a saving of Diablo 4 for people who may have already had their fill, or if you were even disappointed with the game. I don't know that this is enough to sway people's opinions, but I would call these all predominantly positive changes. If future seasons continue with this level of improvement and fine-tuning, that would be amazing. I do think, though, in my honest opinion, what the game really needs is just much more content variety. There should be a lot more stuff for us to do, a lot more things. I still really say that the game could benefit from having some downtime activities as well. I know it's an ARPG. People just want to smash, right? But I think some fun downtime activities could actually really help flesh the game out, especially for the more casual player base. Hopefully these are the sort of things, more endgame content in particular, but maybe also some more downtime things that come with the game's first expansion, which, as we have learned, is planned for 2024 and every year after that, because yes, Blizzard is planning to release an expansion yearly for Diablo 4. Overall, yeah, I'm pretty happy with this. I'm excited to jump back in. I think they're making some really great strides here. I have seen some rather cynical takes to this update, people saying things along the lines of they're only making the game better to get us playing again, to which I say, yes, correct. Yep, that's okay. If that's the motivation required, if they need to get us playing again to make the game better, if that's what it takes, I just want good games. Make the game better. Don't give a crap about your motivation for why. Just make the game better. All right? That's it for me today. Thank you for watching. Diablo 4 saved? I don't know if it's saved, but it is getting better as far as I'm concerned. I'll see you guys in the next one. Take it easy.